but that's just because it's simplified enough to make it easy to read, and there's a lot of juicy stuff in it. One thing about this chapter is that the author quotes a couple of studies made about this and how AI is going to play out in the workplace, and how many of us jobs will actually be using this. And according to this study, they had quantified 1,016 different job categories. And according to Mollick, they thought only 36 of these 1,000 job categories had no overlap, as they call it, with AI. And those jobs with no overlaps were like stuff, as you can imagine, like dancers and athletes, pile drive operators, roofers, and motorcycle mechanics. And then he goes on to say, well, even these categories, he heard they were using AI at other aspects of their business. So basically, everyone can expect to be using AI in their workplace as a daily tool. And he takes his own job being a professor in a business professor. And this study had ranked these 1,000 jobs from top to bottom. How much overlap is there? And according to Mollick, a business management professor ranked as 22 from the top of 1,000. So there was a huge overlap. And even so, says he doesn't feel threatened in any way. He hopes to be able to offload like routine works to AI, but he can't really see that he himself will lose from it. But there's a lot of benefits, and he has some other examples of practical benefits from his book. There's a study that had done together with Boston Consulting Group, where about 800 business managers, management consultants, had been taking part, divided into two groups. One that worked their standard way they've always done their various tasks, and one that got to use ChatGPT 4, like the basic ChatGPT version. And they gave this group some basic AI training, and they had assigned 18 tasks to do these that were sort of similar to what they would usually be doing. Like creative tasks, such as propose at least 10 ideas for a new shoe targeting underserved market. Analytical tasks, like segment a market, industry market. Writing and marketing tasks, draft a press release, marketing copy for your products. And persuasiveness tasks, such as pen an inspirational menu to employees. So they had these 18 tasks. They were set to do it, and they were a timer, saying how long time did it take these consultants to produce output on these different tasks. And they found that the group working with AI did significantly better than the consultants who were not. The AI-powered consultants, according to the criteria they were using, were faster. Their work was considered more creative, better written, and more analytical than that of their peers. So it's interesting to see that they've actually done some kind of experiment that you can quantify whatever benefits you can see. He then interesting goes on to quote another study that shows the danger of what they call falling asleep at the wheel, because they're getting overconfident in these AI tools and not so much not checking the results as not trying to squeeze as much effect as you can out of them. In this experiment, many participants just were pasting in whatever tasks or questions they were set to use in the tool, and not trying to see if they can think themselves for using a better prompt or ask a better question. And people also became prone to just cutting, pasting out the results, the answers they got from the tool, and not taking putting in the work or the time to see how they can better it. And they would just pass it on and see the tasks as done. So I find it a little hard to relate to that myself. I guess if you're in a volume business where you have lots of tasks to do and you need to have a high flow of output, you might be tempted to do something in that way. One example they used from a study was they had set HR recruiters, people recruiting workers for jobs, and they gave them HR support to use this. And here it turned out that the HR recruiters who got high quality AI tools, they were, quote, became lazy, careless, and less skilled in their judgment, missing out on some brilliant applicants. Whereas recruiters who were given lower quality AI tools were much more alert and more critical and more independent. So I guess that's something to try to remember when you're working with this stuff, is to see it as a stepping stone rather than anything else.
Henrik, is that called one step forward and two steps back?
Yeah, I mean, you always will get a varying quality of the results in every group of people, I guess. I get this is sort of, I guess, generalized uh, reports in this book from a more, you have to probably read the study to get more exactly how this played out. Not to take too much time on this chapter, I had lots of interesting stuff, but I'm going to skip ahead to some other practical ways of working with it that he uses, and he uses has descriptions on how different ways, different approaches of working with AI. He'll talk about I don't know how to pronounce it in English, centaurs or centaurs, like the half man, the half horse being on the one hand, and cyborgs as another, where the Kentaur is seen as a clear, you have a clear line between the person and the machine. Like some parts of the stuff is done by the human, and sometimes some part of the work is done by the horse. Like you won't, you'll divide up the work, whereas the cyborgs sort of blend and go back and forth. Well, you'll ask the AI for input, and you'll think about it, and then you'll develop this and give it back to the AI and sort of mix back and forth. So these are two different kinds of ways of categorizing how he sees people using and working with AR. Like it, and obviously the ideal, at least to me, would seem to be when you learn how to use it, to be more of a cyborg and really and not cut yourself off from it. But obviously there are just some kinds of tasks deemed as not suitable, not at this time very suitable for working with AI. Another interesting approach that he describes is that when he uses the example of writing this particular book, the co-intelligence book, and he says that he was looking for, wanted early feedback on the text. It was still in a rudimentary stage. He thought the text was not developed enough to show to his editors, or I guess usually you ask some friend or colleague or family member to read and give review. But he wanted to get feedback from the AI tool, and so he started by asking it to work in three different ways. What little I've had time to play with ChatGPT is I can see you can write, can sort of designate separate agents and make sort of subversions of ChatGPT. But here in the book, he doesn't go that route. He'll just give an instruction that I'm now ChatGPT want this feedback from you on this text as a certain kind of character, where he talks about Ozymandias, Mnemosyne, and Steve, where Ozymandias tasks, the persona in ChatGPT, Ozymandias, is to offer critical feedback to help improve this book. And I guess he's inspired by the Shelley's poem Ozymandias, where I looked up a quote from this, where a line in the poem is, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." So that is, be critical. Whereas Mnemosyne is more of a he directs and tries to get the tool to provide more of a creative spark to the same text. And this is inspired by, I guess, the Mnemosyne from Greek mythology, who was the mother of the nine muses, who inspired different branches of literature and poetry. So his persona, Mnemosyne, has the task of finding unusual and interesting connections and stories that are related to the text that he shows the tool. And then thirdly, he wants the AI capability to act as what he calls an every person and give a median reader's view of what he's written. So he calls this person Steve, as just plain Steve, who has the job to be a normal human reader of popular science and business books. You as a resource are somewhat confused about how you got to be inside a computer, but you're very helpful. So this is, I thought, was a quite creative view of trying to sort of slant the ChatGPT in this case to look at the task it's given or the text is given from a particular angle, and then put this together, and also avoiding boring, senseless your family, friends, and colleagues by giving early text. I'm mindful of our time, so I'm going to skip some other quotes I made from this. I ended up with like maybe 5 pages of snippets from this ebook that I bought. to use. But I want to end with one quote that he has. He quotes what he calls his Amara's law, named after the futurist Roy Amara. And I had heard the quote. I'd never heard of Roy Amara, but I've seen this quote, and I think it's very apt to apply to AI, where Amara says that we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run, but we underestimate the effect in the long run. So that's me for chapter 6. How about you, Justin, for chapter 7?
Well, thank you for that for chapter 6, Henrik. So for chapter 7, I was going to approach this slightly a little differently, but I kind of wanted to open this up and ask the group. We've all been to law school. We all went to college. What was the typical way that we would learn? We were in a classroom. And my question for the group is, were there a lot of teachers, or was it one teacher? And as we got to college, it was for 100 or 200 students. So did we have a lot of real interaction with the teacher? And how many had teachers that were just, you were half asleep in the class? I had several. Anyone else have those? We all have. So what this chapter talked about was, by way of example, how many of you have ever had a tutor? I had a tutor for algebra, and I had one for statistics in college. Anyone else in the room in their academic career get a tutor for a particular topic? Anyone else? Did you find the tutor was helpful because they were very specific and could teach you or work with you with where you were at, not with where maybe the teacher had been teaching the curriculum? The reason that I bring this up is what the chapter that I read worked on was how AI will impact the classroom. So imagine a classroom now that uses AI where those who can't teach. Yes.
Those who can't
Very
teach,
good point.
teach though.
Okay. Very good point, Henry. So what I read about was, how could we use AI to transform the way that we learn in the classroom? And I hadn't thought about this, but how many of you went through a math class where you were allowed to use a calculator? Or when I went to MBA school, you could use one of those financial calculators to calculate, the time value of money. And when that happened, a lot of people were concerned that the calculator would make it so that people would just not work on their basic math skills anymore because, hey, the calculator could do it. And so, like everything else I've learned, because I'm mostly a technology lawyer, it's funny how history repeats itself. Whatever we're going through, we can find some historical antecedent. And so part of the chapter talked about how teachers adapted to the use of a calculator. But what's different today is the calculators started out expensive. They came into the classroom slowly. As we've seen with ChatGPT, it's been a torrent. It's come very quickly. And another interesting thing was, homework, the effectiveness of homework has gone down steadily over the years. And I'm curious as to the group, why do you think that is? Because you can start using the internet and ChatGPT to do your homework for you. And so it brings up these challenges. But one of the things it talked about was, well, I think you're going to start seeing in classrooms where you have to do the essay in class with a blue book. We have to go all the way back to that, because using your computer could bring ChatGPT into it and other AI, because it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. And you can really make large language models really write like a student. I know I've configured ChatGPT to write like I do because I gave it a sample of my writing. And so I want you to consider, what could the future of a classroom look like? Maybe it's something along the lines of using more work at home with an AI tutor that's kind of training with you and where you're at. And then you come into a classroom and you work in a smaller group to apply the concepts. And then the teacher may be going to the different groups to help facilitate specific issues that each group is having. But one of the interesting things that I read that I just from my own standpoint thought of is, if we continue to rely on these technologies and these tools, I'd love to hear from the group, what happens to the ability to interact with other human beings? at least with the practice of law, what I think we've all seen is there's a certain judgment, the way you communicate to the client, the way that you think through a problem. Is that something that could get lost? Because I see it with younger folks. They really struggle to write because they're so used to texting. And will AI make these trends a little bit worse? So I kind of wanted to stop there, and I've been talking a lot. Chris or Mitchell or Keith, anybody have any thoughts around that? What are your experiences?
Well, mine is concern, if that's a thought, but because yes, I mean, I haven't yet used it to the extent that you're talking about, but I know that my young lawyers don't. I pay for Westlaw. They don't use Westlaw. They jump on Chat GPT and and they get answers that are so specific that they don't learn anything else around it. We used to be able to drill down to the problem. You'd learn a lot of things along the way, and now I'm seeing that they come up with an answer so quickly, but there's a loss of learning along the way, which from a lawyer's perspective, lets you kind of have a bigger picture of what the problem is, right? Whether you're defending it or you're going after something. So that's the part that I've experienced so far.
You make a great point, Mitchell. Keith in Hong Kong, or I'm sorry, Chris in Hong Kong, you have a thought? I know it looks dark where you are.
It's 9, well, it's 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. I do have an interesting observation on the educational side. I've got a son at University 21, and I said to him, it must be really easy for you with ChatGPT. He said, Dad, it's not. He said, it's okay for you. He said, because you're older. He says, you type your stuff in, and he says, you fix it, you correct it, you use it as a base. He said, I can't do that. He says, I haven't got the experience or the skill to understand what it's telling me. He says, I spend a long time looking at what I get out of it to find out if it's okay or not. And that is a sort of concern, is that the more that AI looks around the world, the more it gets the wrong information, the more it gets disinformation, the more difficult it is to filter out what it actually tells you. Because the more that's wrong out there, the more that's wrong inside. So rubbish in, rubbish out. But it was interesting to hear him say that he thought it was easier for me to use it than it was for him. Interesting observation.
Because you had a baseline of knowledge to be able to, it's almost like you're able to intervene and say, hey, this doesn't sound right, or it does. And he's like, I can't even get to that point because I don't have that baseline.
The way that we use it as lawyers now, or the way we use it, and you say, draft me a contract for a hotel safe contract for people who go and stay in a hotel. You would see it and you'd say, no, that's right generally, but it isn't right specifically. It's going to need topping and tailing. It's going to need some general clause. It needs a few boilerplates, and you'll put it into shape. Yet he wouldn't do that. He'd be looking at it thinking, well, I'll use that. He's got no bigger skills to be able to manipulate the answer he gets. And that's a bit like the calculator example you gave, where using a calculator is fine if you have a broad understanding of what the answer is going to be. So 3 sevens, if you don't know what it is and someone says it's 5,000, you just take it to be 5,000. So you need to have an experience before you can specifically put your trust in what you're seeing there.
That's great. Thank you for that. Jason in Connecticut, I see you look like you're bright and early and up. Do you have a thought you'd like to share on what you've been hearing from your own experience, or maybe?
Well, this actually leads into the next chapter, which I'm responsible for. So I don't want to get too far ahead, but if this is a natural segue, we can go with it.
I have one more thing I want to say, and then I'm going to pass the baton to you. So one other point they made in the chapter that I think is worth mentioning is, at least I've been doing this, is I've been trying to learn how to prompt. And it says, hey, in the short term, that will be good, but longer term, I think we'll be acting verbally with computers like you see in Star Trek. Hey, it'll be Siri or whatever, and it'll be very lifelike. And it's saying that in the short term, prompting is good, but in the longer term, it's more about how you interact, how you truly understand GPT. Like, I sent it a picture last night. There's something on my siding. I don't know if it's a butterfly, a wasp nest, or whatever. And it's like, oh, I think it's a bat. And I'm like, are you sure? Could it be this or that? Again, I was trying to give it context. But that was the last point that I wanted to make. And Since Jason, you are on my screen, my 5 minutes are up, and I'm handing the baton to you for chapter 8. So, Jason, please take it away.
All right, so this does transition well to the conversation we've been having about essentially expertise, right? And so chapter 8 is AI as coach. I think it could have been titled AI and mentorship or development of expertise. And this one really spoke to me because it's been one of my major concerns, and I'm gathering that from this group as well, with the arrival of AI is, how do you develop, young lawyers who are going to come in? Where did they get that foundational knowledge that we've been discussing that makes them experts, right? And I think they framed it in the book as the biggest danger to our education system was not kind of the in classroom type issues, but rather the loss of the apprenticeship system that we have in so many professions, trades, everything from law to being a carpenter, right? I remember this feeling of my first day coming into the office after law school and feeling like, law school does a great job of teaching you the law and how to think. It does a very poor job of teaching you what the day-to-day job of a lawyer actually is. And that's where that apprenticeship comes in. That's where that mentorship comes in. And oftentimes, those skills and base of knowledge are hard earned, right? They're the entry level jobs, the menial jobs that people, detest and complain about. But that's really where, you start, at least traditionally. You'd start at the lowest rung and you'd work your way up. And really, they talked about in the book that apprenticeship is how you turn amateurs into experts. And with AI, there's really that risk that goes away. So certainly for the legal profession, if you think about the work that has traditionally gone to younger associates, right? It's the research or the memo writing or first drafts of things. And I think even before AI, at least we experienced that there were certain, especially larger corporate clients who were already saying, you can't bill us for first year work. Right, that's not what we hired. That's not what, we're not paying so you guys can train your lawyers. And I think AI has only exacerbated that situation because you're starting to see that clients are expecting that, we use these tools to pass on, savings and efficiencies to the client. But as was pointed out in earlier discussions, if, the young lawyers aren't doing that work, where are they getting their basis of knowledge, their foundations? And there's going to be a large training gap. And one of the examples they gave from kind of a similar technology shift was surgeons and moving to robotic surgery. Robotic surgery is becoming more and more prevalent. On my commute to work, I see the billboards for hospitals touting all this for work in orthopedics or heart surgery, things like that. The problem in developing young surgeons, though, is whereas in a traditional operating room, surgeons could work, side by side with the, more experienced surgeon, guiding the younger surgeon. When you do robotic surgery, it's one surgeon in the chair, and maybe the younger surgeons are watching from another room, but they're not getting that on-the-job training. They're not getting real-time mentorship. And so the other interesting thing that the book goes on to talk about in this chapter is that there's kind of this paradox because as expertise becomes harder to obtain, at the same time, it's becoming more important for those reasons that I think Chris was talking about, which is how do you check AI, right? Because those are going to be the skills that are really needed. And it's the experts in the field who can do that, who can take something that's been generated by AI and say, yeah, this is a good starting point, or it's really off base. How do we fix it? How do we make it better? And so the real question of this chapter was how do you keep that pipeline of experts going? And the first point that the authors make is a return to the basics, that you still need to teach the fundamentals. That's be it memorizing things, just really building up the storehouse of fundamental knowledge. And then that needs to get paired with what they call purposeful practice, which I had heard before, and the book references the idea that if you want to be an expert in something, you have to do it, put in 10,000 hours. Apparently, that's not true. And that just repeating something over and over again is not really how you develop expertise. It is this idea of purposeful practice, which would include ever increasing difficulty, setting intermediate goals, and I think most importantly, fast and frequent feedback from experts at your firm or at your office, right? That mentorship. And this is where at least the authors see the potential for AI as coach, and having AI with the ability to give instant feedback, make suggestions, and even provide encouragement. Now, the examples they give in the book, the AI is not really there yet. They've been some studies that they've done that have used kind of multiple iterations of AI to get to that point. So, it was this, they were doing a marketing study and you had to pitch to the AI. And so they had the different stages of pitching set up in the AI. So it wasn't as simple as, you could submit one thing and the AI would generate feedback. It was a bit cumbersome, I think, to be used commercially. But the idea is that at some point in time, AI can be there and you can get that, instant feedback, continuous feedback, whereas maybe, you're meeting with your mentor once a week or once a month. So it had some advantages over a traditional mentorship. Although I think, as we all know, you lose kind of those soft skills if you're not interacting with an actual mentor and learning from people and being brought along on things. One of the things that AI does do in terms of developing expertise is it can close the gap between your high performers and your lower performers. And this has been seen, I guess, across the board, be it, at law schools or other types of areas where it really does, a lower performing student using AI can really come up to the same level as the high performers, and so it closes that gap. And it talked about that in the context, which I thought was interesting, is that no one is an expert in everything, right? We all have our strengths and weaknesses. If you can use AI to kind of plug the gap on some of your weaknesses, you can really focus on what you're good at. And there again, they turned to the medical field and they said, some doctors are really good at diagnosis. They're really bad at, other, like writing up reports or something, or, mentorship. And so they can lean on AI for, plugging the gap in their weaknesses. I thought one area of expertise that stood out to me that, I hadn't thought about looking for with new lawyers coming into the firm is this idea that the experts, who are going to be really valued are going to be these people who either intuitively, naturally are gifted at working with AI or who have, learned to be experts at working with AI. Because, in the future, you want to be the human in the loop, right? AI is going to be taking up more and more of the roles traditionally done in certain fields, but there's always going to be, and I thought this was an optimistic note for those of us who have thought that AI will replace all of us, is that, there's always going to be the need for the human in the loop. You just need to figure out what that expertise is going to require so that you can essentially stay relevant. And that's the idea of this co-intelligence, wanting to be the human that fills in the gap. The one thing I think this chapter left me wanting was kind of the practicalities of how you develop that expertise for those younger lawyers. It wasn't, and I don't think it's meant to be a practical guide, but it was, okay, what do you do if they still need to learn these basics, if they still need experience, trial and error? How do you provide that when, the technology is coming along that says you can do this faster and cheaper, and you have clients at the same time, encouraging you to do it faster and cheaper? So I think there's some work to be done at, certainly at our firm about, looking at this, and we've had a much bigger emphasis in more formal training programs that go alongside with our mentoring. But, I think the practicalities of this are kind of where the real devil is in the details.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, so I have chapter 9. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Kahn with Hoke Fenton in the Bay Area. And Jason's comments flow nicely into chapter 9. That made a lot of sense. Harold's still not here. We might be a little bit ahead of schedule. This might be a good moment to reflect and let other people comment, particularly on Jason's comments, because I'm going to be talking about the future. So I talk about the chapter where the author guesses about the future. And before we get there, Jason, you mentioned some of the efforts that your firm is making to teach, utilize, experience, try AI. Maybe that's a good point for all of us to just sort of chime in. And I don't think it should be a long discussion, but so we're here 3-ish years into it, 2.5 years into it. The product has matriculated up and down into all the things we use. Here in the US, we've got Westlaw and it's got AI components. Are we all comfortable with that yet? Maybe a few examples of institutional comfort level with AI, if any. Nobody?
Well, if I can start here in Sweden, we are like on a learning curve where we're doling out, rationing our paid accounts for AI tool. We have one that's a specific Swedish AI tool that has trained on just tons and tons of this knowledge company's own material. And so we got 5 licenses of those and handed it out to trust people who could be trusted to use it responsibly. And now we're moving on to do this work with ChatGPT. But we really feel like we need to learn by doing and not roll it out slowly.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'll
I
share
know,
our
Steve, that my office has just engaged Westlaw to give us a free run on the AI, and they're starting to train a group of, I think we've got 7 lawyers that we signed up to from different practice areas of the firm to see how it goes and how it impacts. It's going to be different for different practice groups. I mean, for the transactional guys, it's one thing, and maybe the risk level is not going to be so significant. Whereas in my area of litigation, there's so many dynamics that go into to issues, into writing, into style, and everything else. So I'm curious to see how that goes. But we're tackling that, and in about 3 weeks we'll hopefully be done with that and see where we are. And I got to tell you, it's a question also of how do you bill for that? I don't want to stray from the question, but I mean, I as I'm was bringing in Westlaw people, I'm thinking, do I want to do this faster? And if I do, then is it mean I'm going to have more room to take on more work, and or will I be cutting into the profits of the firm? Anyway, I don't want to go there because that's not where you're headed, but that's how my brain works sometimes.
I've not used the Westlaw or Chelsea Reuters and Lexis.
Alistair, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
A little better.
Sorry. I've not used either Westlaw or LexisNexis.
I think we lost him.
I think we lost you completely.
He must be using AI to connect to us.
It's funny, Mitch. A little bit now, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I've not used Westlaw or LexisNexis AI, but we are investigating that issue. I've done a course in relation to AI and legal tech, and I think your concern is right, Mitchell, but I think it's certainly from doing that course, it's one of those things where if you don't do it quicker and everyone else is doing it quicker, you just won't get the work. So you just have to think about charging it in a different way. And I'm comfortable certainly with Westlaw and LexisNexis because it's the point that one of the other providers made earlier on. Both of these have verifiable quality insofar as the input source of what's being scraped to come up with the answer They have, it's case reports or it's things which have been provided by recognized specialists. So when it strips across their source, the answers that it come up with are going to be better and more likely to be accurate than, for instance, open source scraping, which is perhaps only going across anything on the internet from various websites, which might or might not be correct. So the way that it was suggested to us about the benefit of it is much like the task that you might provide a trainee or an assistant to do, to go away and prepare a briefing note. That then comes back to you, and it's the speed at which you can go from a blank page to a starting position is phenomenal compared to perhaps an assistant doing the research. But it still requires, as the chap from Hong Kong says, it still requires that experienced eye to be able to look at it and know if something's wrong or it's been picked up incorrectly. So to my mind, I think it's going to be an invaluable tool going forward, and in essence speed up everything, albeit it still requires to be checked and verified.
Nice. Those are good comments. Thank you, Alistair. And I agree. I thought Chris's comment about his perspective working with somebody younger of getting all the AI results and not knowing what to do with it, that hadn't occurred to me. As a 20-year lawyer, I kind of know what I'm looking at and know how to sort it out. But what if you don't? So imagine that. Okay, so I'll go next. The last chapter in Ethan's book is about the future of AI. So it's a bit, pun intended, predictive about what might happen. And he lays it out in four quadrants, but rather than go through them in sequence, I'm going to tell you what they are and then we can discuss them. So his idea of the future is either we're now where it's as good as it gets. So the AI you're experiencing at the moment is the best AI will be, and that's it. Enjoy it. That's extremely unlikely, according to Ethan, and I agree with that. His next concept is maybe we'll have exponential growth of AI. So it'll get bigger, it'll get faster, it'll get better, but it'll happen very quickly. I think Ethan probably pegs that as our future of AI. He also proposes slow growth, which is something different than exponential. The idea there would be, instead of 10 times better every year, AI just improves at 10% a year. I'll go into each of these in a minute. He suspects that that's probably not our future. Slow growth is less likely than exponential growth. My favorite part of the chapter was his prediction of item 4, which would be AI turns into a machine god. And now everybody's thinking of the Matrix right now. Exactly, I know. But that's not his proposal. His proposal actually is more like a Tolkien novel. So The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. So bear with me for a minute. He introduced a word to me that I had never heard. It's called eucatastrophe. The idea that we have a beautiful, perfect catastrophe at the end. Just like at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where everything's perfect, despite having gotten there in a very hard way. He thinks that AI could end up that way, that in the near future or moderate near future, AI solves for everything, but not in a bad way. Instead of turning us into World War III, it turns us into a situation where you can walk into a hospital and everything's perfectly sorted. Everybody who works there is AI fluent. All the humans know how to interact with it, and it solves for all of our problems and makes our lives a lot better. I kind of like that one, although it's a little bit frightening to be in the machine god future. So let's unpack all of these briefly. The first one is as good as it gets. I love a quote that he starts out the chapter with, and I'll read it here. It's, humans walking and talking bags of water and trace chemicals that we are have managed to convince well-organized sand to pretend to think like us. So think about that. It's all just elements talking to each other. If we end up on an as good as it gets path, then that's easy to imagine. There's no technical growth. AI stays the way it is. All of us kind of plugging away at ChatGPT and having fun let it write some songs for us. That's the way it will be forever. But that's probably unlikely because it doesn't provide for growth. It doesn't account for things like Moore's law, which, if you know what that is, it basically means that the computing power of something will increase double over a course of a couple of years. And we've got a lot of examples of that in our lifetime today. So very unlikely that today is as good as it gets. Maybe we have slow growth. So this is the idea again of 10% a year versus 10x per year. The reason this won't happen is because we're not there yet with AI. But something I thought about is we probably are there with a lot of other forms of technology. So think about it. When the Industrial Revolution occurred in the late 1800s, and then from that time until about the 1980s, we were really moving at almost a 10x clip in a lot of forms of technology and knowledge. And if you think about it, we've kind of pumped the brakes a lot in the past 20 or 30 years with technology. Things are getting incrementally better, but we're kind of hitting this knowledge and skill limit with a few exceptions. And because we've had that experience with other forms of technology, AI is so new that the idea that we're already in that 10% a year phase is really hard to believe. And Ethan Mollick also posits that we're probably not in a slow growth phase there either. But if we are, that's okay. It will lead to innovation. It will lead to a lot of jobs. Maybe government and industry will create rules of engagement. This would be a great result if we're in the slow growth phase, but we're probably not there because it necessarily will have physical and technological limits that don't exist yet for AI. The third concept of the future that I think Ethan Mollick is probably proposing is exponential growth. So this is the Moore's law idea that every 2 years you'll have twice the growth. And so what are examples of that? The classic example is memory on computers, right? Just 10 years ago, the idea of having a couple of gigs of memory on a phone or a computer seemed a little extreme or special. And now if you have 2 gigs of memory on anything, it probably won't work. Like if you have 2 gigs on your computer right now, Zoom's not working for you because it needs more than that. And that's the notion that AI will also improve at that rate, that it's going a lot faster. And here's where I want to get a little bit granular, because in an exponential growth environment of the future, AI will beget more AI and stronger AI. So it won't just be us asking ourselves to create better versions of AI, but we'll be implementing it better to create better versions of itself. We already ask AI to code. We already ask AI to do a lot of menial tasks. But what if we empower it to actually create itself in a good way? I realize that sounds a little bit scary, but that's probably the likely outcome. And another term that Ethan Mollick proposed that I hadn't heard is this idea of an AI-tocracy. So what does that mean? It means that everybody has access to AI. AI has access to its own AI. And the market forces will control what AI is valuable and what AI is not valuable. Governments will intervene and set laws that we can actually follow. So not a law that bans AI. Of course, that's impossible to enforce. But laws that are actually meaningful and create restrictions and also open up avenues for AI to grow and thrive. For us, the result as lawyers will probably be a lot less human work. So we heard comments from Alistair and from Mitch and from others about, well, so what's my role in this as a lawyer? If AI is going to eliminate my job, it probably won't, but it's going to highly value those lawyers who are able to curate AI. And to Chris Short's point, look at the AI results and figure out what's valuable. For those of us who are litigators and go to court, as far as I know, AI will never replace that in the moment speaking opportunity in front of a judge, unless I have something in my ear telling me contemporaneously what to say. And I think that's the point, is it can help me prepare really well. And by the way, it does. But I'm still being paid for my highest and best use, which is being a lawyer, being trained in that way. Just briefly on the machine god future before I step off. It could be terrible, right? This could be the Terminator movie result, but it could also be beautiful because it makes all things better. makes us better, solves a lot of problems for us, and gives us an opportunity to imagine the future that is actually ideal. So those are his 4 thoughts about what the future could be. I don't claim to know which one is right, but I know we're in number 1 already, right? As good as it gets. We're already there. So that can't be the future. The future has to be something bigger, stronger, and better than AI is today. I think it's up to us as lawyers, as leaders, and then on the business side, business leaders. The responsibility is there to attempt to control AI's growth and also teach people how to filter through it, because it is inevitable no matter what you do. Any thoughts on that?
This is Andy Updegrove in Boston. I think one thing that is easy to forget is that the current LLMs are basically word predictors. You know, they're so impressive. It's really difficult to imagine that that's really all they are, that they're predicting the next word. So Stephen Jay Gould had a theory of evolution that he called punctuated equilibrium. And he thought that evolution speeds up and slows down, and that a lot of the dramatic effects can happen rather suddenly. And I think when we're looking at AI, if you look back to the 1960s when it sort of got off the ground, that's what it's been. It's been advanced and stalled and advanced and stalled and advanced and stalled through multiple AI winters. And we don't really know how far predicting the next word can take us. And it wouldn't surprise me at all that we're going to have continued very rapid advancement, and then it's going to stall, because this is, you know, the latest thing. There were neural networks, there was symbolic logic, you know, now there's the LLM approach, and it may be that things do sit for a while, and in a way that wouldn't be bad, because it would sort of allow all of us to catch up and recalibrate and come up with best practices and allow laws to come into place to sort of deal with things. So I'm not as expectant of continuing explosions as I am a continuation of the past that'll give us some time to absorb these things before the next, you know, big innovation comes along and then it takes off again.
And maybe it won't be AI. Who knows? We can't predict that. Any other thoughts on our future? We got 6 minutes left here.
Hey, Stephen, it's Justin again. I guess I had a thought or a question for the group. As lawyers, one of the things we're grappling with is the regulation. The EU has an AI Act. In the United States, the state of Colorado, the state of California is thinking of things. And I just, you know, what is the thoughts from our group around how this regulation is going to roll out? Because from a personal standpoint, I don't have a lot of confidence given what I saw with social media and the fact that Sam Altman and all these people are trying to go in and advise the White House on regulation, which regulates them when they're in a big land grab for market share. And I just love to get the thoughts, because I just struggle with putting those people in charge of influencing legislation. Just seems like asking to get legislation that's very ineffectual.
I don't even know if Florida has an AI Act. Your state has an AI Act, something specific to the use of it or regulates it?
The state of Colorado does. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, but you're starting to see things like the EU has passed an Artificial Intelligence Act. The state of Utah in the United States has as well, in addition to the state of Colorado. The state of California has passed several things that now wait the governor's signature. So in my country, the United States, we're taking this sectoral state approach because we can't get our act together on a federal level, as opposed to the European Union, which of course has GDPR for privacy and EU AI Act. It's just a very different approach because we're dealing with some of the divisiveness of our politics in our country, which, as we've seen, you're seeing a lot of this divisiveness around the world. And I think AI weaponizes all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So Justin, one of the points that Ethan makes in his book about this is there is an opportunity for governments to set boundaries. And And if the government attempts to set enough boundaries, then we might end up in the slow growth phase of AI, right? So how do we stop AI? We can't. It's already exponentially faster than all of us. But governments could create laws that will attempt to slow it down. Industry could create barriers that attempt to slow it down. So really, ironically, the only thing that could slow AI down would be sort of human efforts to set boundaries. Whether those are good or not, or useful or not, is a different discussion. And don't forget that those boundaries only apply to people who stay within them. Lawyers like us, upstanding citizens. The rest of the world, criminals who don't adhere to boundaries, they'll just do, and AI will still be there for them. So it's an interesting discussion, right? What if anything, is the effectiveness of these laws? And then will we adhere to them? And then how do we enforce them if we even could?
That's
Are you
it.
asking
Thank
the
you.
group that question, Steve?
What's that, Mitch?
Are you asking the group that question, or are you asking a particular person?
Oh, I was reflecting, but also
Oh.
putting it to the group. We still have a few minutes left here.
Listen, I think the Florida bar, it's funny, I'm going to email one of my partners now. The bar associations they're coming up with regulations. So it may be that certain segments of our industry, not the legal industry, but collectively the industry in general, will have to create their own uses. I have a feeling you're going to see some kind of federal legislation that's going to just limit the outer perimeters on the improper use of AI, right? I think I want to say they have to at some point. And then it's going to be up to maybe different industries to kind of create their own form of regulation. Maybe physicians will have, certain standards that they'll have to adhere to, and the legal profession, I think is already drifting towards it and how to handle it. And then enforcement, I guess it'll take a couple of suspensions from bar associations for failing to follow the AI stuff, maybe to kind of keep it regulated. But there's got to be some limits, because we're just seeing now how dangerous this progress can be, if that's an odd way to frame it. They're going to have, in the U.S. I speak for that because I don't know what the EU is, and what their limitations or their restrictions are, or the regulations, I guess is a better word. But it has to be something at some point. It's otherwise it'll be a runaway train.
That's right. So with the last minute, does anybody who's operating in the EU have thoughts on, will the EU actually be able to enforce its AI compliance laws? I mean, it's great that they exist and they're a nice example of what we might be able to do, but what's the reality?
So personally, I wouldn't underestimate the EU and the EU Commission's interest and desire to enforce their laws, but they're usually not in a big hurry. I mean, look at GDPR. It's though that's part of the national authorities mostly, but I mean in other sectors, that the Commission, I would say, works slowly but surely. So you may not start seeing big enforcement actions on day one or year one, but if companies completely disregard it, there will be consequences.
Here's a twist. Why don't we have ChatGPT create the laws to regulate itself and see what it does, see what it cranks out? I'm sure somebody's actually come up with that as an experiment. If it can do all those things, to analyze itself and recognize its own risks and, tell us how to regulate itself. It sounds like a movie, doesn't it? So it sounds like
like Asimov's law of robotics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that that's actually occurred, Mitch.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody has asked ChatGPT to think a few steps ahead for itself.
Yeah.
And that's one of the potential futures that the book proposes, that's okay. Let AI solve for its own problems and create its own boundaries, as long as we are able to act as curators, intelligent curators still.
it'll be interesting to see how like, I don't know what if I may use the word humanity sort of changes, in the sense that people were complaining. There's records of people complaining when the written books became more common, that we lost the use of memory in the way we used to be, because people would memorize these very long texts as songs, like the Iliad and like the old Greek verses, and even laws, and everything was in your memory. And I think when you didn't have to rely on those people or yourself who had able to store these enormous amounts of words in a coherent sense, but you could read the books instead. There was complaints that this would cause people to think in a less advanced manner. And I don't know about that. This is probably was, most people did not have huge amounts of volumes in their memory, but still, I do believe it probably has changed society when people get access first to books and now to this. So there will definitely be changes. Question is it going to make us more stupid, as some people think?
Certainly could. I
Hey,
want to
Steve,
be mindful of
Steve,
time.
can I just ask a question before whenever it is that we sign off? Chris, was it you that said you were training your ChatGPT to conform to your writing style?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. Somebody said that earlier. I would kind of like to follow up with them offline and see how that's done. Okay.
I'll send that round as a question, Mitch.
That was a university student question.
I'll send it round as a question, Mitch.
Yeah, somebody was training their AI to assist, to train it to write in their writing style.